Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Marlow's Big Game Preview live here at the Marlow's in Brookhaven. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation's recruiting insider Jeff Sentell, and let's face it, all-around good guy. We're going to be with you for the next few minutes, taking a look at the game this Saturday against the Florida Gators in our DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville, which is brought to you in part by our friends at Marlow's Tavern. Now, you hear us talk about Marlow's all the time, and if you've never been here, you've got to make sure you change that really soon. Whichever Marlow's is the closest for you. We're in Brookhaven tonight. They've also got you all over the Atlanta area in Sandy Springs, Cumming, Lawrenceville, Avalon, Beaufort, all kinds of places. It is a great spot for chef-inspired food, craft cocktails, a whole bunch of fun. If you want more information on that, check them out online. You can become a Marlow's Insider by also texting the word Marlow's, that's M-A-R-L-O-W-S, to 24242, and you can become a Marlow's Insider, and you can have as much fun at Marlow's as we do each and every time we're here. And with that, I'll say hello to you, Jeff Sentell, and when you think about this Saturday, you think about one of those games for Georgia fans that is really special, and I know on Dawg Nation Daily I talk about the Florida game all the time, but I'm not the only Georgia fan that feels that way. This is one of those unique rivalries in college football. The destination of the game makes it so, and I think the way that Georgia fans approach this game this year, a special hunger to win this game because it is a good season, and because the last few trips to Jacksonville to play against Florida have not been good. That makes this rivalry this year even more intense than it is in many other years.
First of all, folks, I want to call attention to my man's chest. He's going to wear it proudly. This is the 7-0 edition of the Gator Hater T-shirt.
That's exactly right. This may be the first time anyone's ever looked at my chest and liked what they saw, but in this particular case, maybe they do. The Gator Hater insignia, the license plate right here on the front, it is in red, and at the Dawg Nation Invasion tailgate, which is brought to you in part by our friends at Marlow's, coming up this week on Saturday, we're going to be giving a whole bunch of these things away.
We've shared a few away tonight.
That's exactly right.
You know, the other thing, Brandon, I'm stretching my memory back on here. Maybe you can confirm this fact for me. Has Georgia lost a football game since we've been doing Facebook Live broadcasts at Marlow's Taverns?
That is a great point. We started these things, back in January of last year, and since then, Georgia has not lost a football game. So clearly, we are the ones you've got to thank for what Georgia's been able to do. It was our work here during the recruiting season leading up to National Signing Day. All throughout the season this year, Georgia put together the number 3 class in the country, undefeated on the field. I think it's pretty easy to draw a connection between the two.
Maybe that indoor practice facility as well.
That may have had a little something to do with that. We got a lot we want to talk about tonight, but before we kind of get into anything on the game and anything on the field, and obviously I know a lot of y'all want to ask Jeff recruiting questions. We'll give you a chance to do that with our broadcast tonight as well. Indulge me, though, on the topic that I've been dealing with for so much of the last few months. You're a guy that not only covers Georgia recruiting now, but you really understand the history of the Georgia program. Would you agree with me, and it's okay if you don't agree with me on everything, but would you agree with me that the Florida rivalry is indeed supposed to be the number 1 for Georgia? And it is indeed the one rivalry that does provide the biggest springboard to future success for Georgia. Because the Gators over the last, going back since 1990, have averaged nearly 10 wins a season. Better than Auburn, better than Georgia Tech. You gain more by beating Florida consistently than any other team that you would play. Do you agree with me on that?
Well, I just think it's just always been that way, Brandon. And we're going to sound a little bit old here, but I thought every Georgia football team, even when I was growing up as a wee lad, you learned whether or not Georgia was good or great by how they did with Florida, Auburn, and Tech. That was just the back half of the season. Everybody's like, Georgia's schedule is so backloaded with all these tough teams. Yeah. That's kind of what Georgia has always been. And I think a Georgia football team, especially within the stigma of the Spurrier years, my friend, they don't know whether or not they're any good until they see what they do or do not have in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
I think that's always going to be the case.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that it is a measuring stick. And, that's true in years in which, in the Urban Meyer, Steve Spurrier era, in which Florida was ranked very highly and Georgia some years was not. And it's also, I think, true still in a year like this in which it's Georgia who totes in the number 3 overall ranking, and Florida's 3-3. Very different teams, maybe even very different programs right now between Georgia and Florida. But beating Florida is still a measuring stick for Georgia, and I believe still a stair step it has to take towards its other goals for the rest of the season. Being in Atlanta for the SEC championship, you could be there without the win against Florida, but let's face it, it's a little more hollow if you can't take the rivalry win with you into Atlanta in the college football playoff. All of the great things that Georgia wants to do, either this year or in the program's future, beating Florida and beating Florida with regularity is sort of, I believe, a step towards doing some of that.
Well, I think you got to look at it. I think even Kirby Smart said, humility is only 1 week away.
Yeah.
This is not what anybody wants to be thinking tonight on this program, but if Georgia has another one of those Treon Harris games where Treon finds a way to lead Florida past Georgia, despite only completing 3 passes, let's remember, folks, this game is so important. Georgia, if somehow they lose to Florida, they might even fall out of the top 10.
Yeah, here's the thing. I totally get what Kirby Smart says when he says humility is only a week away. We all know that's true. But there's a big difference between humility, which a loss would be, and humiliation, which a loss to Florida would be. And that's the thing that I think kind of goes unspoken here. It's one thing to be humbled by losing a game. Most teams in college will be tripped up at some point in time. It's another thing to be humiliated by losing a game to a Florida team that right now doesn't belong in the same field as Georgia. And everybody that I talk to around Dawg Nation is just tired of those nasty, stinking Gator fans.
Yeah, I just always went into that. Maybe that's because of the generation I grew up in and what I've been shaped in, Brandon. I always thought Georgia needed to be about 20 points, 17 points better than Florida to win that football game, especially the way things bounced on the banks of the St. Johns River. That was probably what a lot of Florida fans were saying during the Dooley years as well. And this rivalry does have its ebbs and flows. I bet not a lot of people know that both schools don't even agree on the annual record.
Oh, yeah.
There's a dispute about Florida thought it had a JV team that year and wasn't a varsity team. And
someone said they have a JV team right now.
They probably do. I like that line right there, sir. And I would say that, Georgia, they have a different view of the overall one-loss record as Florida does. Both media guides, history books for each school are different, but I just think this is the year. And, you mentioned that phrase stinking Gators a lot. I think you're connecting those words a lot together right now. And I tell you what, if the Dawg fans did not get what they're looking for this weekend, I mean, this is going to be some psychiatry visits on Monday, man.
I'll be the first one in line for sure. In addition to Jeff and I talking about the game against Florida, we're going to take a bunch of your comments here this evening as well. We're live here at the Marlows in Brookhaven. And by the way, we got a great group of folks hanging out with us in Marlows in Brookhaven tonight. They always make a lot of fun. Marlows makes it a lot of fun for us as well. They are gracious hosts. And if you can't be with us, we'll give you a chance to talk right now, including Kevin Jones, who says, "Go Dogs, kill the Gators." Blake Lumpkin says, "I said it's great to be a Gator hater." Blake, I'm right there with you on that. Jessica, I hope it's Huth. I hope I pronounced that right. Maybe Huth. Either way, Jessica says she's going to see us on Saturday. She wants a Gator hater T-shirt. Jessica, we'll save one for you. We appreciate you being here. Chris Collins says, where can we get the Gator hater T-shirt? So the red one's like the one that I'm wearing right now, courtesy of our sponsors like our friends at Marlow's. It is going to be available for you if you can be with us on Saturday. Now, some of the folks at the Marlows in Brookhaven, because of a special deal we were able to cook up with Marlows, they were able to get some tonight, but we're going to be giving a lot of these away, several hundred, I understand, in Jacksonville on Saturday. There at our Dawg Nation Invasion tailgate from Jacksonville, which we will tell you more about over the course of our program here today. Dean Easler says, lifelong Gator hater. Dean, love to hear that. Neil Landon Jackson, appreciate you checking in. We'll take some recruiting questions here on the shirt here as well. A lot of you are talking about the T-shirts, which I, of course, like to see. J. Cody Ratliff says that he loves the T-shirt. Chris Thompson says, I look drunk. No, listen, I'm not drunk. I haven't had anything to drink at all. I think what it is the red sometimes really makes my face look a little flush. See, the problem is when you have these fat, rosy cheeks, they have a tendency to look a little flush when you put the red on.
Now, listen, he's being modest. He was on Paul Feinbaum's show tonight, guys. Let's give a little hand for Brandon right there, man. He was on Paul Feinbaum's
Chris
show
thinks the cocktail party for me has already started early. No, listen, I'm as sober as a judge right now. I can promise you on that. Adam Spire says, what's the over-under on if Brandon Adams wears anything other than a Gator hater T-shirt until Sunday? That is true. I have worn one every day so far this week. Wore the black yesterday, wore the red today. I've got maybe a couple of these reds to wear. Yeah, I'm going to be in a Gator hater T-shirt on Dawg Nation Daily every single day between now and the cocktail party on Saturday, and why would you not?
I tell you what, you probably should save that answer to this Brandon question, the query, does Brandon look drunk? You save that maybe to Saturday night after about a 19-point win for Georgia in Jacksonville.
Yeah, feeling tipsy for two very different reasons potentially on Saturday night in Jacksonville. Tommy Massey checking in from Daytona Beach. Tommy wants one of the T-shirts. We appreciate that. We'll also take some of your recruiting questions as well, including Pete Ellis, who asked, and this will kind of get our recruiting conversation started here a little bit. Pete wants to know, like everybody else does, all right, Fields is in the fold. Adam Anderson comes in on last week. Who's the next person to commit? You wrote about that this week at DawgNation.com. We talked about that a little bit here a moment ago. I always love these off-air conversations with Jeff at Marlow's because he has a tendency to say some of the things that he doesn't necessarily always want to say or supposed to say. But give us some thoughts from you about who that next commitment for Georgia might be. Who's in your short list for that right now?
Short list, you got to kind of think flips there. You got to think Otis Reese, Lee County, Michigan commitment right there. He's a potential flip candidate. I think you would also have to think about Robert Cooper, Florida State defensive tackle. He's going to take a bunch of visits, but he might be a potential flip commitment. And a lot of other guys have, like, set-up ceremonies. Like, people want to know, like, who's the next big target. Well, that's simple. That's Jamari Sawyer. The next big target after that would be Tyson Campbell. I think the number 3 target would get very interesting depending on who you're looking at. Is that KJ Henry? Is that Trey Hill?
Oh.
Is that Robert Cooper? Is that Otis Reese? Is that Channing Tindall? Is that Luke Ford? Is that James Cook? I think I just ripped off a whole lot of names there.
A lot of 4- and 5-star names of guys who recently were connected to other programs, either official public commits or strong leans. I mean, it is amazing the inroads that Kirby Smart has made here with a lot of those guys. Ford, one-time Arkansas commit. James Cook, one-time Florida State commit. Tyndall is strong. I mean, he's been connected to a multitude of schools, including, I guess, Tennessee at one point in time. He was kind of a lean towards. It's amazing how much work Kirby Smart is doing with guys of a very high and 4- and 5-star caliber who have been really strongly linked to other programs.
Yeah, you're going to look at it, and it's eventually going to become an assessment of needs and whether Georgia can get the best 25 guys they want off their board. Do they take a second tight end? Do they take 2 inside linebackers? Do they take another outside linebacker? Do they take a 3rd defensive tackle? Do they take a 2nd running back? I do think they take 1 quarterback. I do think they take at least one running back.
Yeah.
I do think they take at least 1, maybe 2 more offensive guards. And maybe the position you got to look at, and I know the name Alontae Taylor has came up a lot of bit.
Yeah, Tennessee commit.
Tennessee commit. We wrote about him about 2 weeks ago. He kind of told me firmly, Georgia's in the running for my last official. Not going to make any moves until Butch Jones something happens with Butch Jones, which is kind of right now saying, I'm not going to enjoy the Florida game until I see someone having a drink.
I don't want to get too far off the track here in terms of what Georgia's trying to do both against Florida on Saturday and with the 2018 class, but you brought up Butch Jones, and there is at least in a couple of instances maybe an overlap between the Tennessee class and the Georgia class. Are you surprised, given the early signing period this year, which starts on December 20th, that after the Alabama game this past Saturday, they didn't go ahead and make the move on Butch Jones? I mean, I think if Jones were to win out and go 8-4, he may save his job, but that's not saving the Tennessee class. I mean, at that point in time, I think you're going to have a lot of guys who can look elsewhere start to look elsewhere. So I guess in a way I'm kind of curious, why hasn't Tennessee already moved on Jones so that it can hold on to an Alontae Taylor or a Trey Dean or any other number of names that you want to mention there?
It's going to reach a point, Brandon, where it's going to be counterproductive. You got to think, okay, who would be the interim head coach? Well, that would probably
Brady Hoke.
Obviously be Brady Hoke. He's got that experience in Michigan. But then you got to think about who would take it, who would want to take it. To me, we stretch about 2 more weeks during the season, and Tennessee will have to say, Butch has saved his job, he's back, in order to kind of quell all the fires around his job around that very, 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 very hot seat right now.
Let me change the subject here, go back to the game against Florida on Saturday. By the way, that's Jeff Sentell. I'm Brandon Adams. We're live here from the Marlows in Brookhaven. We're doing our Dog Nation big game preview with our friends from Marlows, looking ahead to the game on Saturday against the Gators and our Dog Nation Invasion tailgate, which is brought to you in part by our friends at Marlows here this weekend. Going to be a lot of fun. If you're going to be in Jacksonville, I hope you'll make plans to see us. And just maybe while supplies last, we might be able to hook you up with one of those great-looking red Dog Nation Daily Gator Header T-shirts like the one that I'm wearing right now. All right, Jordan Browning, the comment section, he brings up a subject, and you tell me if you think this is fair, because I kind of understand where Jordan's coming from on this. He says we, meaning Georgia, are not losing this game, meaning Florida. This is not a Mark Richt UGA team. And, there's a lot of, obviously, Richt fans still listening and watching us right now. I totally understand where that point of view comes from. But in Jordan's case, I understand this as well. It does seem like Kirby Smart and this particular Georgia team approaches games like this with a different edge than we certainly saw from Richt in the late stages of his career at Georgia. Do you think that's a fair thing to say?
I just think you just got to look at it. And this is going to sound like a Kirbyism, I guess, a little bit here, Brandon. But you got to look at it in the concept of this one year. And, yes, Georgia is a powerhouse this year. They're the nation's number 3 team, rightfully so. But I think everybody would feel a little bit less jittery about this game. I think the reason why everybody feels comfortable about this game, and Mr. Browning can say those things, is Florida doesn't have a good football team right now.
That's true.
They don't have any
Fair.
cohesiveness on offense. They have all those suspended players that robbed them of the talent they did have. They don't have what they would like to have up front. I think you see Florida in stretches in times this year. They're about 275 off across their defensive front. That's going to get you beat in a four-quarter SEC football team against a physical downhill run team like Georgia. So it's kind of the combination of Georgia way up here, Florida way down there. And I do think the fans have every reason to be confident because this is a game. I just think mentally the way this team is built from the inside out, whether it's the brain out, the inside out, but also the line of scrimmage out, Georgia's never sent this many backs at a Florida team like this. I mean, even when they went Tim Worley, Keith Henderson, Rodney Hampton, those guys like that, they never had Lars Tate. They never had these backs like they had with the combination of that defense, that special teams, and also a very, very competent quarterback in Jake Fromm.
Speaking of confidence, we've also heard some confidence coming this week from Florida. I want to talk to you about that in just a moment. Let me get one more comment before we do. You mentioned kind of a lack of girth and size with that Florida defensive line. Patrick Haffey saying, how many rushing first downs does Georgia get on Saturday? And Patrick's question kind of ties in to exactly what you're talking about. Now, while Florida may not be the biggest defensive line, this is one area in which that McElwain has probably hit on some guys in recruiting. Think about Zuniga for a moment. Think about Antonius Clayton. Now, Sherritt's injured and hurt. He's not going to play on Saturday. But the deepest spot on the Florida roster, I believe, is along the defensive line. Kirby Smart has said this over and over again for the last few weeks. The first couple quarters for him are about trying the running game, seeing how it works, seeing if you can get the other team to quit, and if they sort of bow up against you, keep chopping that wood and keep running the football. Is there a chance that Florida, through three quarters, can bow up enough as a defensive line to make this thing close going into the fourth quarter because of the bodies they're able to run out there along the defensive line, even if they're not as big as maybe some of the guys that Georgia's playing?
Well, you're talking about a football game right there, Brandon, and when you start putting those things in, can Florida bow up to halt Georgia, to slow Georgia? I just think it's going to be a matter of they're going to have to commit more guys into the box, and I do think Georgia has a quarterback in Jake Fromm that can make them pay with a vertical passing game, working the tight ends, getting something creative on the edges with their space players like DeAndre Swift, Mecole Hardman, and guys like that. I just think for Florida to take away the run that Georgia has and even slow it down, they're going to open themselves up to a lot of man coverage, and I think Jake Fromm can beat that.
Speaking of Jake Fromm, interesting that you'd bring him up because, Chauncey Gardner, one of the Florida outspoken defensive players this week, apparently he's not as impressed by Fromm as you are. I want to show you this tweet on the screen here from Jordan McPherson, who covers Florida for our sister site, SECCountry.com, from Gardner with his media availability this week. Gardner on Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm says he's throwing simple passes. I get it. Anybody can throw a slant, and then Jordan McPherson gives you the hashtag Gators, given the fact that's the team that he's covering. That's such a non-Georgia thing to do. And for McElwain, who is much like Kirby Smart, a former Saban disciple, Saban assistant, just goes to show you that in McElwain's case, the apple has fallen very far from the tree because Smart would never allow that from a Georgia player. Saban would have never allowed that from an Alabama player. Yet McElwain seems to tolerate this. There's an element in which that Gardner embarrasses himself with what he says about Fromm because clearly he's ignorant of the fact that Fromm's having a much better year than he realizes. And we've seen Florida players already this year get them in trouble with these kind of proclamations.
Yeah, it just seems like one school is coming into this game with their business suits on, ready to go to work.
That's true.
Ready to show a really professional effort, a polished effort. And it seems like the other one is just sitting here swinging wildly, trying to hope something connects. And all they're really trying to do there is try to throw out some things that would rattle a freshman quarterback that has looked very composed and polished so far. That's kind of rat poison from Florida right there to try draw some, anguish or angst out there from Georgia to do anything besides just do what they do.
So here's the thing, and listen, maybe on Saturday night when we're doing our Dixie Vodka post-game show, maybe I'll have egg on my face for saying this. I've been wrong before. Certainly don't take any kind of comfort in my prediction right now. But if Georgia loses a game this year, Jake Fromm is not going to be the reason why. Now, I can't tell you for sure that I do know why Georgia would lose a game if it ever loses one, but this notion that somehow the freshman quarterback's going to leave Georgia hung out to dry, yeah, the Notre Dame game, Fromm probably did not play very well that day. He probably had a bad day, a game that day. Georgia may have been able to be a little bit lucky to kind of play around Fromm a little bit. That's the second week in September. A lot has changed since then. But even back in September, his yards per attempt is still in the neighborhood of about 8.5. He's up almost near 10 yards per attempt in the month of October and really for the entire season, leads the SEC in that metric right now. This is a guy who's not been called upon to make a lot of big throws for Georgia, but as you pointed out a moment ago, every single time he's been asked to, Fromm has been more than equal to that challenge.
Yeah, I think Fromm, even if Georgia was to lose a game this year, I think you're right there, Brandon. I smell what you're cooking right there. I don't think he's ever going to be the sole reason why Georgia would lose. I think maybe if he does make a mistake like what he did against Notre Dame, throwing that early pick, he'll bounce back and do things to put his team in a position to win. I think eventually the end game for Georgia is they might get exposed by better receivers going up against their secondary and attacking them deep. Everybody worries about that Missouri game, but you see a lot of bouquets being thrown towards Drew Lock these days about how well he throws the football and how good he is at delivering the football. I just think Georgia, the way they're built, they're going to play a 4-quarter game. They're going to continue with that run game. And you got to remember this, Brandon. Aside from that Notre Dame game in hostile territory, Georgia hasn't had a lot of games in doubt in the second half.
That's exactly right. And you mentioned guys like Shea Patterson, who's hurt now, and Drew Lock, who Georgia got to see 2 weeks ago. The fact of the matter is, if we're going to judge quarterbacks by simply counting passing yards, that's a recipe to end up with a pretty bad team, because the two guys that you just mentioned who've thrown the ball pretty well, Missouri, Ole Miss, they're essentially butt naked last in their respective divisions in the SEC, whereas Fromm, nowhere near the same degree of passing yards. He's not throwing the ball nearly as much, but when he is throwing the football, he's throwing it accurate. There's a stat that's been floating around Twitter the last couple days in terms of his accuracy on balls, 15-plus yards down the field. I mean, he's actually having a much better year than a lot of people realize.
I think Jake Fromm is doing everything Georgia would ask him to do, and I think that's why he's holding off Jacob Eason for the job as well. And I think lots of good things are ahead for Georgia and Jake Fromm.
Let me give you one more tweet here from Jordan McPherson, who gives you another pretty volatile quote from a Florida player. This time wide receiver Josh Hammond, who said this week that, bringing up the fact that Florida had won 3 straight against Georgia, they might be the number 3 team, but they can't beat Florida. That's a receiver who's not even going to play on Saturday in all likelihood, saying that because of the past and history, Georgia's not going to beat Florida on Saturday. And listen, y'all know I'm not objective when it comes to this. I have a bit of a bias about this, but you touched on this a moment ago, and I think this is a really good point to bring up. If the only thing that Florida can do is give you a history lesson about this game on Saturday, then they're just grasping for straws at that point in time.
It's basically the way you look at it. It sounds like those Georgia fans that were quoting Dooley years during the Spurrier years. They really don't matter, folks. What's going to matter is which team knocks the other off the side of the ball and which team creates running lanes and affects the quarterbacks for their opponent. Which team is just going to win a more physical football game in the SEC? That's basically going to be it, man. And all the cards, all the tea leaves, everything kind of points to Georgia in a big way there.
Let me transition to a few more of our comments here on Facebook Live. By the way, that's Jeff Sentell. My name is Brandon Adams. This is our Dog Nation Big Game Preview. We're live here at the Marlows in Brookhaven. Of course, if you've never tried one of these Marlows before, we actually had a few folks here with us tonight for the very first time ever having a chance to experience the chef-inspired food and the craft cocktails at the Marlows Tavern. You can certainly check that out for yourself. And you know what? If you want to get treated just as well as at Marlows as Jeff and I do every time we're here, the best way for you to do that is become a Marlows insider. Text the word Marlows. That's M-A-R-L-O-W-S. No apostrophe in the text here, but text Marlows, M-A-R-L-O-W-S, to 24242. You can become a Marlows insider. And every time the Marlows closest to you has some big things going on, they've got a great event coming up. You'll be able to hear about that. They'll let you know about all the cool stuff, and they've got some special offers for you as well. And you know what, Jeff? Whether it's the cheeseburger here that I love, the buffalo wings you and I devour, always a lot of great stuff here at Marlows, including a chance to sort of settle in and have a cocktail. What is it? The Blueberry Buck. Is that your favorite cocktail here?
That is, man. It's pretty good, man. It's got a little infusion of blueberries and vodka and a little bit in there. Maybe not Dixie vodka just yet. Maybe that's for Saturday night. But I tell you, the other thing I like about, they got a new menu item called the Chicken Stack. I don't know if you've heard about it yet.
Nice.
A couple of our CMG, Cox Verticals crew, thinks that's the 5-star dish right now.
Nice to hear.
That's the Justin Fields, Jamari Sawyer type dish for Marlows Tavern. And they just got great people here. It feels It feels like you just wish there was a Marlows right around the corner from you everywhere.
Everywhere you go. That's exactly right. Ryan Elledge asked about Tyreke Johnson. You gave some really interesting off-air intel about Tyreke Johnson a little earlier here from the Marlows in Brookhaven. I don't know if you're ready to say that on this broadcast. You may wait to write that a little bit later on, but what can you tell us about Tyreke at the moment?
Tyreke just took an official visit to UCLA. It was his first official visit. Very interesting there for Tyreke because he's always talked about that's the school that would be in it for him. That's the school that has recruited him consistently hard. They offer him the great educational endeavors he wants to see with his college football opportunity. I still think Georgia will get an official visit from Tyreke for the Kentucky game later on this year. He's got a lot of conflicts there with his high school schedule. But I do think Tyreke Johnson is not the only Apple defensive back in Georgia's eye right now.
That's interesting. You know, Tyreek's one of those guys that this has been actually going on for really a couple years with him, where he trends wildly in the direction of Georgia, then seems to veer away for a moment, then kind of wildly back in the direction. Would you agree with me? There's kind of been some on again, off again with Tyreke and UGA. Yeah. Maybe that's on both sides from time to time.
There's some hot and cold, you could say. And, you know, I remember him, very smart kid, very calculated young man, and he left the opening all decked out in Georgia gear, Georgia shoes, Georgia jumpsuit, everything else. And I think that was really Tyreek's way of kind of sending a statement about how he felt about Georgia without actually making that statement.
We were talking about some of the comments from Chauncey Gardner and Hammond, the receiver, a moment ago. Danny Pope asked about that. Do you think that actually has an impact on the game? You know, we've seen Georgia – I mean, we don't know for sure that it used the Jonathan Abram stuff in the Mississippi State game, but it certainly seemed to use that pretty well. I mean, Lorenzo Carter seemed to be motivated by that. Do you think what Florida players said this week, does that become extra motivation for Georgia?
I think it's an example in whether – I don't know how the media met with those particular players, but there weren't the key core players for Florida for their chance to win this football game. And I guess the first thing that came to my mind when I saw those comments are – these guys are not game-changer Gators. These are not the guys that are going to make the difference between a close game, a rout, or a close loss for the Gators. It was very interesting, the guys that said that. These weren't Florida's all-SEC candidates, but Florida doesn't have as many all-SEC candidates as they usually do this year.
Casey Hutchinson in our comment section says if he's going to be in Jacksonville Saturday, he's hoping to be there. He's going to come by and see us at our Dog Nation Invasion tailgate. And if you're going to be there as well, we'd love to see you there as well. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. It starts at 10 a.m. This is our Dog Nation Invasion tailgate this Saturday. It's 10 a.m. It's going to be at the Tailgaters lot. That's a part of that sort of like touchdown. It's actually Tailgaters Parking. I'm sorry. The Tailgaters parking area, the touchdown lot. It's right there off Bryan Street near Gate 6. That's where we're going to be starting at 10 a.m. You and I are both going to be there. You mentioned Dixie Vodka a little earlier. We're going to have a Dixie Vodka tasting lounge set up for those who are 21 or older. I'm wearing the red Dog Nation Daily Gatorator t-shirt tonight, courtesy of our sponsors like our good friends at Marlow's Tavern. We've got a lot of those to give away on Saturday. Just a really fun time to kind of hang out, talk about great memories of cocktail parties past, and really looking forward to a brand new era in this rivalry. We'll do that starting at 10 a.m. with our Dog Nation Invasion tailgate. Jeff, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Here there's a trailer with 4 TVs there as well, so you can get all your early pre-gaming in and see all those other earlier games on the schedule before the CBS game. Now, rumors are going about food, and I don't know if there's going to be food or anything like that there, but there will be the Dixie Vodka tasting session. There will be a lot of prizes. There will be some gift bags. There will be some stuff from the Dog Nation swag prize vault. I think you're going to be able to take some pictures with Brandon Adams on Coronation Day of day one of the Gator Hater Countdown.
I don't know if you want your picture with me, but I'll take my picture with anybody who's around there because I want as many pictures as possible of the Gator Hater message because I want that thing spreading all over Jacksonville on Saturday.
What's the countdown right now? Where's the count meter at?
We were at 4 today. Is that right? We were at 4 today for the Gator Hater Countdown. We were at 4 today, right? Yeah.
4.
I joke about this all the time, and this is inside information.
Fourth quarter?
Like Four Horsemen. The hardest part of the Gator Hater Countdown has been keeping up with what day it is. Strangely, that's been, and I've got a lot of people that work with me that are a lot smarter than I am, but strangely, keeping up and making sure the Gator Hater Countdown is accurate has been way more difficult than you might would imagine.
Well, that sounds like something that the trade school of North Avenue would be very good about keeping up with those numbers. Pocket protectors, slide rule joke, or whatever you want to say right there. But, Brandon, I just think I wanted you guys to jump in here on the comment section. He seems like a different Brandon Adams this week to me. Does he seem like a different BA to you guys? This is his element. I don't even know how we're going to get him up next week for the South Carolina game.
Oh, listen, no, come on now. Once you finish off Florida on Saturday, we move right back into Operation Own the East. Don't forget about that now. Now, don't forget about Own the East. We spent a lot of time talking about that before the start of the season. Florida's a step towards doing that. But a lot of y'all got Own the East T-shirts from us back at the beginning of the year. You're looking forward to kind of popping those things out when it actually does become official. When you start popping that champagne, those Own the East T-shirts are coming back out because we told you back in August it was going to happen.
So this is a reporter's question. Forgive me for this, man. Where does the Gator hater countdown go on Sunday?
Stop it. Listen, I'm Kirby Smart here. I'm one game at a time.
What do you do after the game's over? You going to unveil a new countdown in the middle of the show?
You media types can worry about that kind of stuff. I'm chopping my wood right now. Let me hit a few more of the comments here in the comment section, by the way, as well. A lot of folks want to talk about the recruiting and everything kind of going on with the program. Casey Hutchinson also talking about Isaac Nada, saying he gets at least a touchdown and possibly 100 yards or more. One of the things we know is that Nada knows the state of Florida very well. Folks in the state of Florida know him because he spent a little bit of time in his high school career there at IMG Academy. Could you see a big day for Nada catching some passes from Fromm in Jacksonville this weekend?
I'm going to say this. Everybody that has this doom and gloom about tight end usage and where are those guys at and how they're not utilizing those tight ends, there will be a game plan and there will be a game and there will be a time that comes where the tight ends will get their showcase in the Georgia offense. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that's going to happen.
By the way, I love what Terry Crews has to say here. You know, today, if you read Seth Emerson's report from DawgNation.com, Georgia during its practice spent some time with some wet footballs, and there's a chance of rain in Jacksonville on Saturday. It's not going to rain on our Dawg Nation Invasion tailgate, but it may rain later on. Terry Crews says, how about Georgia, practicing with those wet footballs, showing a level of preparedness that maybe you haven't always, if I could be so bold as to say, you maybe haven't always seen from Georgia teams in the past. That is a nice level of preparation.
Well, in some years, Georgia started a quarterback that couldn't really throw the football against Florida to begin with.
Come on.
Wet ball or not. Everybody remembers some of those experiments that will not be named, but I think a lot of the wet footballs are going to have to do with maybe ball security.
Yeah.
Also maybe winning the turnover battle. Remember, those were key tenets of what Kirby Smart was trying to build: line of scrimmage, special teams, win the turnover battle. Nobody was really thinking about having 2 or 3 rushers over 100 yards. I think this is a really big game. I don't know if everybody's spoken about this enough. I think this is a really big game for guys like Sony Michel this week, guys like DeAndre Baker, guys like that have been down there, Florida boys that are going down there for them. This is their game. This is their Gator hater game for them. And
that's a good point.
They definitely want to win that football game. And if you had to sit there and think about maybe which Georgia player really goes off and has a brilliant game on Saturday, I think one of my leading candidates would be Sony Michel.
Okay, I think it's a really good game as well. Thinking back to his high school career from American Heritage Plantation, just south there in Plantation, Florida, near Fort Lauderdale. Sony Michel having a big game going out. His Georgia-Florida career in style would certainly be a great thing to see. My name's Brandon Adams. This is Jeff Sentell. This is our Dawg Nation Big Game Preview live tonight from the Marlows in Brookhaven. Of course, we're huge fans here in Marlow's Tavern, and whichever Marlows is closest to you, if you have a chance to go by and see it, you're going to be a huge fan as well. We were in Sandy Springs the other night. We've been in Buford here over the last couple of weeks. We've got another big event coming up in just a couple of weeks at a Marlows we'll tell you all about. But we love it here because of the chef-inspired food. I'm talking about like the best burger I've ever had, terrific fries. I love the flatbread appetizer, wings. You mentioned the chicken stack. It's also the chef-inspired cocktails. They've got a great selection of craft brew. This is just a cool spot to hang out. It's a really comfortable patio here tonight. Just a great group of dog fans here hanging out with us. We love being a part of Marlows. You can be a Marlows insider yourself if you'll text the word Marlows to 24242. All right, we're going to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. Before we do, here's how I kind of want to set the stage for the rest of our broadcast. I joked with you about not looking ahead a moment ago, but I do want to look ahead before we're done to a week from right now, because a week from right now, the very first college football playoff ranking is going to come out. And where does Georgia kind of fit in that discussion? Obviously, a lot of that depends on how the game goes against Florida, but we'll allow ourselves to kind of peek ahead a week here before we're done. Before that, though, let me get a couple final thoughts from you on UGA recruiting. Obviously, the big news here is of late, you get the commitment from Justin Fields. Fields breaks his finger last Thursday night in a game that was televised on ESPN2. I get the impression from talking to you, though, and hearing from others, that this is not the kind of thing that's going to slow him down athletically for very long. He won't play a game again as a high school senior at Harrison, but he could still play as the Under Armour All-American game. He could still play in the Under Armour All-American game, could still be a participant in spring practice if he were to choose to do that. Mm-hmm. This is not going to sideline him as an athlete very long, it sounds like.
I think, Justin does everything fast. He does everything as quickly as he can. I think it may be 4 to 6 weeks for the bone to heal, 4 to 6 weeks of physical therapy. Let's say, hedge our bets and say 11 weeks. That would put him having the ability to be cleared and ready to go for that Under Armour All-American game. Pretty big thing, because that might be the last time he represents Harrison High before maybe enrolling in January at the University of Georgia.
Jonathan White, let me change the subject here real quick. You mentioned Sony Michel a moment ago. He said, what are the chances we see Sony truck a Florida defender, make another highlight? He's obviously referencing that game against Missouri from a couple weeks ago. There's a chance that Sony Michel could do that.
Sony Michel is, I think the Georgia video team, great job, Dawgs, on that front, by the way. They put together a montage of Sony Michel truck sticks, and he got one against Sanford. He got one against Notre Dame. He got one against Mississippi State. I think he truck stick somebody coming off the bus on the off week or something like that. Sony Michel, the guy that's the shifty guy, and maybe everybody thinks of Nick Chubb as the power back. Sony Michel is really putting up the highlights in his senior year.
Let me get back to recruiting for a moment, because you're talking about Justin Fields and the fact that he's kind of working his way back to health here again after the finger injury, and obviously Dawg Nation wishes him well along that way. You know, a guy that sort of brought Fields down a couple times early in the season, Adam Anderson, committed to Georgia just last week. And, you know, I've been kind of sort of very full-throated about this. I think when the list is done of most important UGA, commitments who turn into signees, and maybe I'm guilty of having 9 guys in my top 5, I'll grant you that. But Anderson's in my top 5 in terms of most desired Georgia recruits, most important commits, guys that could end up being big impact players during their Georgia career. And for me, it's a very simple reason. You look at the teams that really get after the quarterback. Take Alabama, who's not doing it this year as much as they have in the past, but 2015, 2016, 50-plus sacks in both those years for Alabama. And if you look at the numbers, it's not one guy getting 20. It's one guy getting 12, another guy getting 8, and then a handful of guys getting a few. It's about stockpiling competent, capable pass rushers. Anderson's one of those guys. KJ Henry could be one of those guys. But for me, I think Georgia fans should celebrate Anderson as much as they celebrate, maybe not as much as Fields, but certainly right there in that conversation with almost anybody else you could bring in.
Wow, Brandon, you bring up a very much of a you bring up a great point there, Brandon. A great topic for conversation there, if you will. You talk about the top 5, and it's not the top 5 they need to get. It's the top 5 they could potentially get.
Yeah.
Even counting the birds in the hand, the dogs in the hand, so to speak. You want to think the top 5 guys that Georgia has or could target for 2018? I think you're going to have 3 offensive players really in the top 3 there, top 4 there. I think you would slide an Adam Anderson in there. You could potentially slide a Tyson Campbell in there when it's all said and done. But what Georgia is potentially stacking up at outside linebacker is pretty amazing. When you look at a guy like Mr. Tanner out of Millard Grove, and he might be the 3rd or 4th best outside linebacker prospect Georgia could sign this year. And he would probably be the best outside linebacker that an Auburn could bring in or a Florida could bring in 2018. And that's how well Georgia's recruiting right now, and that's why they're the number 7 team in the country. They were number 6 until those Gators picked up a commitment. And it was interesting, though, Brandon. They picked up a commitment.
4-star offensive lineman?
Yeah, but that was their first one since August the 6th.
Yeah.
So they went through a little bit of drought there. So Georgia, on the other hand, picks up 2 guys, nation's number 1 overall player and nation's number 44 overall player.
We're running late here, so let me just squeeze this in quickly. I do think one of the fun storylines, once the season's done, you kind of move into that early signing period. Does Matt Corral at Florida have the same kind of coattails that Justin Fields is going to have at Georgia? We know players are coming to Georgia because of Fields. How many guys want to play with Matt Corral? I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to see.
I think Jamar Chase is a guy that was interested by the Matt Corral. That's why he committed there. Yeah. Jalen Hall is a big-time wide receiver out of California Matt kind of told me that he was likely going to bring Jalen with him wherever he ended up. So Jalen is a big-time wide receiver in 2018 as well.
But it's not a guarantee they hold on to Jamar Chase, though, right?
Not a guarantee.
And I know we're getting into the weeds on this, I know. But it's not a guarantee you hold on to Chase here.
Probably not, and I guess a thorough beatdown by the University of Georgia, something in the 45-0 variety or something like that. That would kind of hurt that class a little bit in terms of those guys.
That is what I'm talking about. How about the idea of a thorough beatdown for Georgia on Saturday? We'll take a win however we can get it if you're a Georgia fan, but certainly you'd love the idea of the Dogs being able to go out and get that convincing win against Florida. And if that happens, we'll kind of transition with this and get ready to kind of close that with some final thoughts. If that happens, Georgia gets that win over Florida on Saturday. You transition to a week from today. That first college football playoff ranking comes out, the very first one. They'll do them weekly after that, leading up to the official announcement of who's actually in the college football playoff. I mean, how do you see this shaping up for Georgia right now? How do you compare an undefeated Georgia to an undefeated Penn State, assuming Penn State gets past one-loss Ohio State on Saturday? What about the idea of two SEC teams in the playoff if the one-loss loser of an Alabama-Georgia game has a better resume than the other conference champions? Are you there yet? Kind of what do you think about this postseason race at the moment?
I think that's really just kind of premature conversation. I guess that a little bit. I think everything will be sorted out, much like every college football season. Give it about 2 or 3 more weeks. I think Georgia, in the end, should they hold serve at least till the SEC championship game, I think Georgia will have a win as pretty as anybody's in college football. That's no shock considering how good of an opponent Notre Dame was and how well the Irish have played on throughout their season. I just really think Georgia has everything it takes right now to kind of run the table right now, win all their football games. Sure, there's going to be one game. It may be the Auburn game. It may be the Tech game. I don't think it'll be the Florida game where Georgia has to pull out something by 1 score or 2 scores in the end, because that's just the nature of college football. I just think all that stuff, can Georgia jump Penn State? It doesn't matter. Georgia's going to get 2 cracks at the number 1 team in the end. They'll get a crack at Alabama in the SEC championship game if they win that one. They'll probably catch up with somebody again in the 14 playoff. Might even play Alabama twice. Long season ahead to go. We are really only barely. Georgia might play 14 games this year. They're only at the halfway point right now.
That is Jeff Sentell. My name is Brandon Adams. Thanks so much for being with us tonight for our Dawg Nation Big Game Preview as we look ahead to our Dawg Nation Invasion Tailgate on Saturday, brought to you in part by our friends at Marlow's Tavern. Always a great time hanging out with the folks at Marlow's Tavern tonight, including right here at the Brookhaven location where we've had a terrific time. Make sure you check out Jeff this week on the Sentell Intel. He'll also be back with you tomorrow night for his regular Wednesday night Facebook Live recruiting broadcast. I'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the Dawg Nation Daily Live. I'll have a Gator Hater t-shirt on again tomorrow as well. I'd love to give you one on Saturday in Jacksonville. Please plan to stop by and say hello to us, and while supplies last, we'll try to make sure you walk away with one of those. It's a fun week for Dawg Nation. It's been a great season so far. Let's keep it going. We'll see you then, and thanks for being with us here tonight.